Good morning and welcome to Success in IT. Today in this tutorial we are going to be looking at the creation of a simple database using Microsoft Access 2010. We are going to look at in this tutorial the creation of the database container itself and the creation of simple tables in Microsoft Access 2010. So let's get started. Once you have Microsoft Access 2010 open, one of the first things that you will need to do is to create the database container. Now the database container can be considered to be similar to a filing cabinet, and inside that filing cabinet you will have independent drawers within that filing cabinet. And those drawers would be representative of our tables. So in each drawer you may have categories of information according to the various entities or the various things that you will have information about. So the first thing we're going to do, we are going to name our database. So for today's exercise, we're going to call our database School Info. Okay, I'm typing in caps just because it's a personal preference of mine. You can select where you want your database to be saved. For me, I'm going to save my database on my desktop. So I'm going to click OK and click Create. Now, at this point, what you're looking at is the design view of your first table. So by default, once you hit that create button, you are looking at the design view of the first table that you will create in Microsoft Access. The table right now is called Table 1, but we're going to change that in a minute. Over on the top left in our ribbon, in our icon ribbon, you see that you have an icon here that looks like a ruler and triangle and pencil combined. If you hover over it, if you click the drop down arrow, you notice that you have a pair of them. One is called Datasheet View, one is called Design View. Now your Datasheet View is your table view, meaning this is the view in which you're going to see your rows and your columns for your table after you've built that table. So if you notice the icon, the symbol for it looks sort of like an Excel spreadsheet. You can see rows, you can see columns. So that is going to be the representative view for your table itself with the rows and columns. And then you have your design view, and your design view is where you're actually going to build your table and give your table its properties. Okay, so in design view we're going to be setting up the columns or fields, as we call them, or attributes. So we're going to be setting up the columns and or fields in our tables so that we can go ahead and put in information, put in data a little later on. Right now you are looking at the datasheet view, and if you click on the drop down arrow here, you notice that you have your datasheet view being selected. So you're looking at the datasheet view. Now as it is now, it doesn't really look like a table because we have not created any columns, we haven't created any fields for us to put in information. So right now all you see is an ID column, but when we're done, this is going to look a whole lot different. You're going to see different columns. We're going to put in information. So at the end of the exercise, we are actually going to have an actual table or two that can be seen in datasheet view as being a table. So we're going to go and click on our design view icon. Okay, and once we click on that, it is going to ask us to save our table, and we're going to give our table a name. So I'm going to call this table students or students and click OK. And right away our view changes and we are now in the design view of our table. Now in the design view of our table, some of the things that we're going to be interacting with are our field names. Okay, so you notice that there's an area here called field name, and our field names would be our column names or our column headings, and this is going to be the headings or the fields or the attributes for various records. So the columns are going to have headings, and this is what we're gonna be creating here. Don't get confused by the fact that this looks more like a table than your data view actually did. This is laid out this way so that we can go ahead and create our fields. Alright, so the just section did off for us. Then we're going to be setting up our data types. Now our data types are the types of data that we are going to be putting in each particular field. Okay, so when a user of the database is entering data, the data type that we set is actually going to determine what kind of data can be entered, as well as what kind of operations the database can perform with the data. Alright, so to begin with, we are going to create some field names. So let's go ahead and create student ID, and I'm going to just use my down arrow here to go to the next one. Student name and room. Okay. You can also click across, or you can hit enter. If you hit enter, then it's going to travel you over to data type and then to description. We're not going to bother with description at the moment. The description really it's an optional field, so you can fill in just a little blurb about what it actually is, what the field actually is going to contain. Okay, but for now we're going to just ignore that and we're going to proceed. So we've set up field names, student ID, student name, and room in students. So these are our table attributes, and all of the various records that we put into our table are going to have these attributes. Okay, so let's jump over to our data types. In each case, the data type is going to be a representation of the type of data that is going to be put into each particular field. So some of the data types that we're going to be concerned with over the next few tutorial videos. We have text. Text basically is a data type that is used to store alphanumeric characters, letters, or numbers up to 255 characters. So names, phone numbers, ID numbers, where those ID numbers contain both letters and numbers. Memo is similar to text. It can store up to close to 650,000 characters, whereas text would store up to 255. Memo would store up to, close to or even more than 650,000 characters. Same alphanumeric, so letters, numbers, characters. You would use memo for something, like if someone has to type in a particular paragraph or description about themselves. Sometimes you may be signing up for something on a website, and it may ask you to type a description. And once you type that description, the description obviously is going to be longer than 255 characters, maybe a little short paragraph. So memo would be useful for something like that. Then you have number. I think that's self-explanatory. It's used to store numbers with or without decimal places. It does not discriminate between the two. And you have date and time. Date used to store the date and time values. You can use it for things like date of birth, purchase date, date joined. Then we have currency, to store monetary values, salary, price. And then we have auto number, which is what we saw by default as the first field in our default table. So when we went into the students table in the design view, we saw that there was an ID field that had been set to auto number. Auto number is an automatic numbering system in Access, and what it does, it just creates incremental numbering. So you would not be able to put in a number in an auto number field. It would simply go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on incrementally. Alright, so these are the data types that we're going to be concerned with. Oh, and yes, we have yes or no. Yes or no is used for storing a yes or no value. So what you may have is a checkbox or a radio button, radio button, and you would click it to indicate yes or leave it blank to indicate no. Okay, so these are our data types described. So our student ID, we are going to set it to text, student name to text, and room is going to be number, because what we're going to have here are the room numbers for particular rooms. So moving along, we're going to go a little bit downwards, and we are going to look at our field properties at the bottom. Now, in our field properties, for each particular field name, and depending on the data type of that particular field, you may see different properties being displayed. And we can look at our student ID field, for instance. Now, since our student ID field is text, which has a default field size of 255, you notice that under field size for the field properties, it shows 255. Now, we do not need to leave it at 255. 255 is the default field size, meaning it can hold 255 letters, numbers, or characters. Leaving it at 255 isn't really it's not going to create that much of a big problem. However, when you're creating a database, one of the things that you want to do, and one of the things that you may be asked to do, perhaps when you're doing your SBAs, etc., and so on, is to set appropriate field sizes. So to set an appropriate field size would be, for instance, if you have a student ID that is 4 or 5 characters long, you would not want to leave your field size at 255 characters. Okay, that would allocate 255 bytes for that particular field, when in essence you only need to have 5. Okay, so for our student ID, we're going to change our field size to 5. If we look at our student name, names are normally a little longer. Some people have some pretty long names. So we're going to set our field size for the name to something that is reasonable enough for the input of a long name. So we're going to say 35. And we come down to room. Now, room, okay, when we look at room, you notice that under field size, we no longer see 255. However, we see categories according to the type of number, because room is a number that we're going to be putting in. So you have categories according to the type of number. Byte would be used to store integer values between 0 and 255 without decimal places. Okay. Integer would be used to store integer values, negative integer values, and positive integer values without decimal places. Okay. Long integer is used to store integer values between say really large integer values. We're talking about maybe a couple billion, negative or positive, without any decimal values. Okay, because remember, integers are whole numbers. All right, integers are whole numbers. Decimal would store decimal places or decimal numbers in the negative or positive. So these are the ones that we are going to be primarily concerned with. So room, these are only going to be as large as 2 characters. So we're not going to use long integer, we're just going to use integer. Or if you're using Office 2016 or later versions of Office, you would see short integer. Okay, so we're going to use integer as our format, as our field size, sorry. For numbers as well, you can also look at the format for those numbers, the numbers that you put in. So aside from actually saying that this data type for this particular field is going to be a number, you can actually set the type of number that you are going to have in. So you can have a general number, you can have your currency number, you can have fixed, you could have euro, standard, percent, etc., etc. Alright, so for now we're not going to pay much attention to this. We are just going to be focusing on the creation of our table with appropriate field sizes. Okay. Alright. Still under students, one of the things that you will notice is that right here we have a little key right next to student ID. Usually, in every table there is a particular field for each record that is entered that is going to be unique to each record. So that field is going to be used to identify each record. An example that I can give is, for instance, nationally, in any country, once someone turns 18 and they're able to work, to be employed, they are going to be assigned a social security number. So in a database or in a table with the personal information of, or the employment details of particular people, you are going to have the social security number being a unique way in which you can identify each person nationally. Alright, so no two people should and no two people will have the same social security number. If two people have the same social security number, then that definitely creates a problem in that table. So your social security number is a unique identifier for you as someone who is employable. Okay. So in this particular table, alright, we have student ID as a unique identifier for each student. So once you use that student ID, you should be able to pull up all of the information about that particular student in that table. Okay, so this unique identifier or this unique reference, ID, social security number, license plate number, license number, these identifiers are called primary keys or a primary key. Okay, So a primary key is used to identify each record in a table. It's a unique identifier that's used to identify each record in a table. So in this table, student ID, okay, is the primary key. You can set any field that you want as your primary key by right-clicking next to that particular field and selecting it as primary key. So we're going to leave student ID as primary key. By default, when you create a new table, the first field in that table is automatically set as a primary key. In some cases, in a few cases, you will have a particular table that doesn't necessarily need to have a primary key because that table does not contain records that need to be uniquely identified. In which case, you can turn off the primary key entirely. Right click, select, it's on. Right click, deselect, it's off. Okay? But in this table, we want to have a primary key, and we're going to set the student ID as the primary key. Just a quick note, we have other unique keys or other unique characteristics for primary keys. Primary keys can change their form and become other things as a database gets built. So moving forward, we are going to now see if we can enter some data into our students table. So we're going to go over to our datasheet view icon and we're going to click that icon. Access is going to ask us if we want to save the table, and we're going to say yes, definitely we want to do that. And we're now in our datasheet view. Now in our datasheet view, we will observe that things are now starting to take shape. All of the field names that we created, all of the fields that we created are now shown. Remember before we just had one field that said ID, and there was this click to add area button over here. But now we can see all of the fields that we have created, and we're going to begin putting in entering some information into our table to populate the table. So we're going to go here and we're going to start to type in some student IDs. Okay, so we've populated our table with information, and this information is completes our first table. So datasheet design view, we've created our fields, we've set our data types, we've given appropriate field sizes for each particular field, and we have put records into our table. So we're now going to go in and create another table. So the second table we're going to create is a table called rooms. So we're going to go to create. First of all, we're going to close this table off. Close. Save the changes. Yes. Create table. Again, we see the default interface with just one field ID. We're going to click on design view to go to build a table, and it pops up a save as box for us, dialog box, and we're going to call it rooms, and we're going to click OK. So we're going to imagine that this table is going to hold the room numbers for available rooms and the teachers who are assigned to those particular rooms. And we're going to create three fields, sorry. Room number, teacher ID, and teacher name. Just like before, our room number is going to be number, our teacher ID is going to be text, and our teacher name is going to be text. We're going to set appropriate field sizes for these. We are going to use short integer or integer for our room number. For teacher ID, it's going to be similar to the student ID, so we're just going to set this to 5. We set it to 5 even if the IDs are 4 characters, just in case we get to an area where we might have to use an extra character. And the teacher name, we have a field size of 35. Okay. Room number is going to be our primary key, since the table that we are creating is going to be based on an entity of rooms. And we are going to be able to identify each particular room by its room number. Okay, so each room can only have one number. You can't have 2 rooms having the same number. So we are going to use the room number as the primary key for this particular table, since the table is about the entity rooms. We go over to datasheet view, we save our table. You can also save your table before clicking on the datasheet view icon. And we're going to populate our table. And here we have it. And here we have it for the second time. We've created a table. We have set our data types, our field names and our data types for those tables. We've set appropriate field sizes. And we have 2 tables under our belt for our school info database.